welcome to the Science of Psychotherapy podcast. It's so great to see you.
Thank you. I'm so excited, you guys. I am excited to talk about this trauma treatment, neuropsychotherapy. We got science of drumming. We got it all. And then you're like telling me to we're only going to have 30 minutes. No. I'm telling you, we got a lot to cover here. So bring on the questions. I'm ready.
Oh, cool. Tell us everything. That's it. Richard
Okay.
here. So, no, but that's great. I mean, the enthusiasm is great, because sometimes Matt and I get criticized for being too enthusiastic.
No.
And because because I have some noise going on outside. It's not people who are drumming, but hopefully it won't be too much.
Yeah.
But Pamela, I mean, we know you. We actually did an article of yours in September of 2019. So members, go back and you can refer back in the logs with the archives of the magazine. But this fabulous work of utilizing drumming. Now, I've done some of this. I'll talk about it, maybe if there's a chance later
Okay.
on. I was at a big conference and we did a big drumming session. It was fantastic. So how about you just fill us in a little bit, just bring us back up to speed. Okay. Who are you? Why the hell you do this? And, what's brought us to this phase,
Sure.
and why it's not better known. Some of these things that are rolling around in people's who are listening sort of heads.
Sure. Well, I got to go a little bit of the backstory first, because I never intended to be a trauma specialist, be in neuroscience, but that's the path that I ended up with. So I started as a drummer since I was 12 years old, very passionate about this, but I come from a long history of trauma. Multiple complex trauma, PTSD, multiple mental health conditions. And so when I was striving as a professional drummer, of course, there were so many hurdles that I had to overcome, but we didn't associate it with trauma, right? They thought it was people would think it was my personality, which would be avoidant personality, of course. So as years went on, and I was teaching, I've got 20 years, or actually more than that, plus. I released an album, and Fearless and Feminine album, and then right when I started to get on the global stage, I suffered a severe rotator cuff injury, and that took me completely out. They said it would never heal. It was just absolutely devastating. And it stayed like that for years. So I was a single mom with a grade 10 education, going through a horrible divorce. There was nowhere else for me to go than back to university. Like that, I had no option. And the first class I took in psychology was with a neuroscientist by the name of Elliot Martin. And he was so hardcore. He was a purist neuroscientist. So he would say, everything that comes out of your mouth, you better back it up with multiple sources. And I was like, he scared me to death. But it was fascinating, so fascinating. And he had said to me, paraphrasing, that the one thing about neuroscience that was so great is that you didn't have to be afraid of challenging the status quo. And I thought, as an outsider, I was like, oh, you're speaking my language here. So that kind of introduced me to this whole world of neuroscience. So instead of the psychology side, so that was a big change in my life, because up to that point, I really didn't have any background in any science at all. So I had grade 12 education. So he, I told him about the drumming, and he had said to me, why don't you study the neurobiological underpinnings of drumming? And I thought, okay, well, that's fascinating. Little did I know, everyone thought I was crazy, because it had barely ever been done. And, there was no interest in it, and yada, yada. So throughout the years, of course, it took me almost 15 years to get my doctorate. I went down the whole path of neuroscience, neurobiology, of trauma, because I had to learn the trauma to be able to get to this point. And so what happened along the way, which is just, this is why I came in as an older adult late 30s going into university. And I started noticing that there was so much division between types of treatments for trauma, and the neuroscience side and the somatic side and the cognitive, all these different, it's like the left hand wasn't talking to the right. So I came in going, what the hell is happening here? Because none of it was making sense. And from my experience, and because I had worked with trauma survivors just through the music therapy and the counseling, that it wasn't adding up. It was like, it's as if all this, the trauma treatment, and I have complete respect for all of those that came before me. However, I think they missed the point in many ways. They missed the integrative brain, the entire brain, including mind, body, soul, and they just like divided it into just cognitive sides of things, cognitive behavioral therapy, all change your mind. And I knew from the lived experience and from the science of drumming, what was needed was this merging of both at the same time. You had to learn how to retrain the traumatized brain using your mind and using your body. So that's a huge part of what I teach. And the drumming is the tool I use. It's not all that I teach. It is the absolute tool. So I talk about, I'm all about retraining the traumatized brain and getting it to work to your advantage. It doesn't matter what condition you have, what you're dealing with. Absolutely everything you do, you experience, you feel, you see, your personality is processed through the brain, right? So you can't be in mental health services and trauma treatment and not be talking about the brain. Like, hello guys, by the way, this is spectacular. Seriously, this should be required reading, because we have to stop this division of having, separate therapies and different pieces without this collective understanding of what trauma treatment should be and what it should offer. And I come in going, you know what? Maybe they had it wrong the whole time. Maybe trauma treatment should start with pleasure, excitement, passion, novelty, music, creativity. Start there. Upward spiral, to push in that heightened sense. Then let's talk about retraining the brain with the mind, but not before we engage this your body and that. So that's the entry. That's the starting point, guys.
Wow, that's fantastic. No, it's fantastic, Pamela. And there's so many things in there. And first of all, for those who are just listening on the podcast, Pamela was holding up Matthew and my fabulous book, The Practitioner's Guide to the Science of Psychotherapy.
I'm giving you big props for this. I have to, I'm not meaning to step on you, but I honestly, and I'm not blowing smoke here, this is what is needed, and it's missing. And there's not enough exposure and focus on teaching therapists of today, 21st century therapists, which I am. I know this is who I am, and that's what's needed. So, okay, sorry, I want to interrupt now.
No, that's great. No, but what I mean, you're bringing up this incredible dilemma that was created by the nature of academic
psychology. It's the nature of psychology, study of the mind. Right?
And psychotherapy is the psyche, the brain, and the soul as well. And what you were talking about when you say, sing it, dance it, move it, act it. This is, of course, what the Greeks did 2,500 years ago. They knew they wouldn't actually talk about it or get down to the philosophizing until they had gone through these experiential engagements to open up the body, to wake up the mechanisms. And although we say, and it's vital and exactly right, that the brain is the pathway is the junction of a lot of activity going on.
Yes.
We also know that the brain is is integrating and acting not necessarily as an instigator, but as a responder.
Yeah.
So we have the heart brain and the gut brain and the skin brain, and we have the cellular communications, and we have what is really, I think, that is one of the central keys to the drumming relationship. There's many, but this is just one of the central ones that jumps up to mind. We have a rhythmic framework within our structure, and there's a rhythmic framework within the universe, but let's just look within us, that when it is disoriented and disengaged and dysfunctional, that's when we get problems. And so drumming has got so many mechanisms. I'm just listening to, there's left, right. If you're working two drums on either side, when you're getting left, right, you're getting vibrational effects. This, for everyone who knows polyvagal, this will have implications on vagal. You have work in the throat, which is stimulating. It goes on and on and on. I won't say leave it to you. But opening that doorway, can you discuss some of these ways it affects and the ways it brings the body into its engagement with itself?
Yes. Well, when it comes to drumming, now the thing that's confusing is that when you think drumming, usually people think, okay, rock star or drum circle, and they don't realize that the art of drumming has been around for 7,000 years. It's very similar to the practice of yoga, and it blows my mind that this hasn't caught on yet. Like, I just think it's like pre-yoga, before they started studying yoga. It's like, once they start studying it, they're going to be like, well, of course, it's everything. So the brain body model looks at drumming from rhythmic integration. So the timing, like what you were saying, looks at it from the perspective of meditation and mindfulness. They've been meditating with rhythms for the beginning, since forever. And so how it got lost along the way, not to study the fact that were meditating on phrases. The program that I created, Neuro-Rhythmic Trauma Therapy, we have what's considered a rhythmic mantra, 4 patterns put together. You play them very slow. You do a concentrative meditation, or you have mindfulness. Once it moves into the motor memory, you're allowed to expand and be able to allow your thoughts to pass by. There's so much involved there. Plus, we have muscle dynamics and breathing techniques. And then we have the whole side of social engagement. Look at what happens. Like, I'm telling you, if I was with you and we were doing the program, if I brought the bond that we would share, and when I share it with anybody, is unbelievable. Like, it's just so, you can't not, like, nobody's ever like sat with me and gone, I don't think so. Like, no, they're like, it opens the door. And when it comes to trauma, and you guys know that, especially for my side, because I was so avoidant, you really couldn't come close to me. The only way you can come close to me is through the music first. So there is this barrier of safety that is allowed, and that is key. It's missing. It's like people are expecting trauma survivors to come into an office and start talking. Well, there's no safety. There's nothing there, and they deserve this. And this is what really this drove me to this obsession to create this program that could be used all over the world, because almost every single culture, country, every population has drums. They have the answer is there, and they just don't know it. So you have to learn the skills of what the drumming can do. It's not just, just play. That's different. Doing something and doing something with intent, completely different. That really has to be understood, because it depends on what I'm trying to accomplish or what I'm working with the client. That depends on what the result is, right? What are we doing it for? And this is a really big part of retraining the brain. And I've got to say this, because no matter what, it still comes down to, you've got to get control of the traumatized brain. You have to become the boss of your brain. I don't know how this isn't talked about more. I tell you, there's no healing or recovery or sustainable change if you don't have control of your brain. And we do that, like I said, using the mind, using the body. And who does that? This is the other entity. Now, you can call it whatever you want. I call it the soul, but it can be your conscious self, your true self, your spirit guide, your God, doesn't matter. But it's this that's telling this conscious intention, even when we're playing with the music, that is controlling this brain. Because if you let the brain have control, cue the beeping because the profanity's coming, that motherfucker is going to destroy your life. It will take you down the path you were never meant to go. It will make you say things you shouldn't say, do things you shouldn't do. It will make you love people you shouldn't love. It'll make you just your whole world of view. If you let your brain, if the brain's controlling the show, there's no hope. There's no hope for trauma survivors to really transform their life because they're going to keep having problems. It's not like you heal and then, no more things. You've got to be able to understand how the brain works and what you can do, what works for your brain, what you can do to make it work to your advantage. And that's how I tie the rhythm and the drumming. It's meant to retrain that brain.
Yeah. Now, can we get very practical here and just talk about your approach? I know you do a lot of one-on-one with trauma clients. So just step us through what your approach is, how you assess, and then how you know what to do, specifically with the drumming.
Okay. So normally, I do the neuropsychotherapy, but then I do the Neuro-Rhythmic Trauma Therapy, which is a 12-week protocol. And it's really based on, now, it doesn't matter what trauma you're dealing with. It doesn't matter what symptoms you're dealing with. There's 3 core principles. You've got to learn how to reset your nervous system. No matter what, you got to know how to go from sympathetic to parasympathetic or too deep in parasympathetic. You got to be able to normalize it. So no matter what, it's that. So then we've got to learn how to release toxicity and trauma from the body. That usually comes from my experience, is people do not know ways to release this trauma built up largely, I have found, from lack of boundaries or lack of the opportunities to have set the boundaries, or even in as adult, like especially with men. I work a lot with men. They're my favorite to work with because in this area in particular, they're taught mainly to suppress emotions, right? So you have to have a way to express them, to get it out of your body, because there's this mental toughness that you can just suppress it, right? Like it's not really happening. No, that's detachment. That's disassociation, right? So of course the drumming works extremely well with them. There's a lot of anger, a lot of rage, a lot of this that has to be worked out. So that's the second. Then the third, then you recondition your mindset. Then you bring in the cognitive skills. So we do a lot of body bottom up techniques first, and then we bring in the top down. Now, I always do a 90-day sprint, I call it. Then we do 3 main goals that the client wants. So whatever that will be, and then I hold them accountable, and these strategies are in place to support the goals. Now, on top of this, the entire framework is based on addressing the 5 primary areas of the brains most affected by trauma. So we've got 3 lower to mid, which is the amygdala, fear center, and I know this is simplified, the hippocampus, which is smaller most of the time. So you got a lot of issues there. And of course, the insula, so the interoception center. Most common, they're completely detached. They're like bobbleheads, right? Not attached to your body. We have to work those areas first. And then we bring in the prefrontal cortex, more the cognitive techniques, and the cingulate cortex, which is more of the emotional regulation. So the client might not necessarily know what we're working on at the same time. It doesn't matter. I can see, you can clearly see when people have no body awareness. You can see when their brain, their fear center is hijacked. Like you can tell. Any experienced therapist will know. What is missing is that there's very few strategies that combine or modalities that combine both. And that was a big part. It's not one or the other. And sometimes we'll switch it up. Like sometimes some of the men, they like to do more cognitive work first, but then I do the concentrative mantras. They love that, right? They understand how it works, and they're not just sitting learning to meditate, but you still have all the science and all the evidence that backs up why this is working. And then we go from there. So that's a 12-week protocol. And like I said, it doesn't matter what the problem is. It's still going to, even if you didn't have the trauma or you were in denial of trauma, it's still going to work because you still got to learn how to get control of your brain. You still got to learn those three, reset and release and recondition, no matter what.
Yeah, I think it's really important what you're saying there. The about the brain. There's this idea in some thinking that the brain is this all-powerful, incredible agency, but actually it's just another biological part of our system, and it functions in relation to the experience that it has gone through over time. And in the same way as our immune system does this, in the same way as we have on cellular levels. And so the brain is not the magician. If the brain is doing something, that doesn't mean that it's supposed to. So, it's not like the god of anything. And so that's a wonderful way of starting the process. And what's interesting in what you're saying, there's two things that you're talking about: cognitive, the settling, the talking. There's two sides that we seem to fight with a little bit in psychotherapy. And I think this is what you're saying, and if I'm on the same train, is one is we stop and sit and contemplate, and that can even be going to things like meditation and mindfulness, which is cool. But what's that telling us? That's telling us that we're disrupted and disorganized and we're trying to settle. But the other one is, and it's something, because my wife's a body worker, and 60 to 70% of our body of our biology does nothing but move us. So our muscles, our bones, our things, and the motor cortex in the brain, and so movement is an integral part. Movement, activity. We know that for depression, go for a 20-minute walk every day, create rhythm, create pattern. But then what you've got with drumming is everything can be sort of upped a notch or two or 20. As you say, it's a bit difficult to walk angrily, although, people probably do that when they're dealing with stuff. But you can whack I've done this stuff. It's fantastic.
Yes, right. It's not. This is why when I started, looking at all the other different techniques, I was like, have people not suffered because those techniques aren't working on me? Because I know suffering at a very deep level, and I know that they don't work for me. So I've assumed there's others that it wasn't working for. So this idea that you get this smack on the drum and you feel it and you ground yourself in to this object. And not only that, you have the whole gamification of learning it, like being able to break patterns down and multiply, adding it on and then building these rhythms that feel so good. I mean, you can't get that anywhere. You can't play a piano and go like 4 notes repeatedly over time. Your brain's going to go, this is terrible. When you're playing the drum, even the simple patterns, you can still get into a state of euphoria. And that was when I first started studying the science of drumming. When I was injured, I started playing a tombak drum, which is a Persian drum that only uses usually the tips of the fingers. And I had to for years with just this parts. And that's what got me realizing, and it was very slow. It is the deepest meditation. I would have this same euphoric feeling. And I would be like, this is what I was discussing with this neuroscientist, like, why is that happening if I'm not doing something like crazy and yada, yada, yada? Well, I was really digging into the reward circuitry where you're gamifying it, right? It was part of this. So I really teach clients how to gamify you don't just ram through it. You have to be intentional. This is a big part, right? The difference of if you were just to play, drums and that, there's still, you're still gonna have benefits. It's not that. It's completely different when you're intentional about what exactly you're trying to do, and the focus on, like I said, what are we trying to accomplish here? Yeah. So that was a huge breakthrough, realizing that you could experience this joyfulness even with the smallest of things. So, and that goes along with hyperarousal and hypoarousal. Hypoarousal, you can do the smallest of patterns. And I've seen it. Yeah, we work with people that are suffering from cancer and can barely move, but you can do the patterns. If you can give them the smallest of thing, you can get that upward spiral effect. It's amazing.
Yeah, I appreciate the dynamic range that you have to work with is incredible. Now, I've got a few practical questions for you about doing this sort of therapy. So, obviously, you're in your therapy room with the client and they're with a drum. Now, do they take a drum home and is there like homework that they have to continue doing, or does it only happen in the therapy session? How does that work?
Okay, that's a great question, because no, you don't necessarily have to have a drum. Okay. Now, most of the time they're very inspired to. So I never am like, hey, you need one. They're like, where can I get one? This is amazing. I don't have one here with me, but I use what's called a turbo slap top cajon. So it's almost like a table. And they're very uncommon. I chose that drum so it wasn't related to any other type of culture. So I didn't want to infringe on, I had played, if you play an African one, you've got issues with, they want to make it a certain one. So I chose this one because it is like a table. It gives you the opportunity to actually start off just with the table or body percussion. So you're not required, but because this drum was made to mimic like a drum kit, it's got snares in it. It's so fun that so far no one's like, it's not for me. It's like, no, I'm pretty sure you're going to want to find this. But you can, like I said, you can use the table. So if we were working, because sometimes it's just virtual, right? So I could teach a rhythm or something just on your body or just on the table or on a pillow. Like sometimes if we're doing, dealing with rage and stuff. And let me say this. It's important with rage because you think, especially a lot of men, they think brute force, like tension. And we know you can't apply tension. You can apply speed. And my style drum, I'm extremely a very fast player, which is, they find so shocking. So they're always trying to catch up. It's like, you're not going to catch up, bro. Don't even try. But so that you get the speed, that release of the speed, but not the tension in the body. So that's how we teach that, right? So sometimes they do it on the pillow, but like I said, they always want the drum anyways.
Yeah, and it's so interesting just to hear that because I know this sort of thing is fun to do, not so much on the stomach, although that can be useful. But of course, when you're doing this, you're stimulating the thymus gland. It's actually an upregulating thing, which may or may not be, where it comes into the going back through primates and they bash their chest. That's not only to frighten the other guy and show that, but it's also to say I'm pumping myself up. But it's activating yourself, and really one of the things that I was a singer, I guess I still am a singer. I'm just not so good at it. But the idea that this is what we do. We learned this in voice classes, and I learned, and we used to tap the what we call the we used to tap what we call the resonant cavities. around the body, and we do this sort of thing, and someone would tap us on the back. And then years later, I went in and I found that these related to the chakra points. That's another way of thinking. And then it related to tapping points, which was it a thing called emotion focused therapy or whatever, some therapy. But that all from different perspectives they come in. But when you're and I would talk about beating the drum within. So just vocally, boom, boom, boom.
Yeah.
And this would do stuff. So you can create vibration in so many ways. But when you add the hands, and it's happening in the hands, you're taking this incredibly sensitive area and beatboxing. With the lips and tongue. So those this area and this area are the most dominant in the real estate, in the sensory and motor cortex. So you can see the tying round. Sorry, you're yang. I'm just actually getting excited.
No, this is great because can I show you one of the strategies? Can I show you? Because it really shows. I do a lot of this because of course with trauma you got a lot of anxiety, a ton of anxiety that people And one of the that when you're in a heightened state, when you've been triggered, you can't think your way out of it, right? We know this because you're in that, your prefrontal cortex is shut down. You need to do something that activates the prefrontal cortex without thinking of that problem, right? So one of the best techniques that I do is the 4-minute habit. And all it requires is you're going to count to 4. You're going to accent the 1, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4. And then you go it around. So let me stand up here. If you were to do it on your legs, because when people are in a state of anxiety, right, you got to first of all get control of your brain. You've got to command it to either find safety, or what I say is we do the 4-minute habit, and you command it to do it. So the rhythm goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. Now, sometimes you're just sitting there and they're doing it like snapping, right? Like I've got, clients out there in the middle of Costco having a panic attack, and they're like, da, 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 da. So faster is this, right? Right? And that activation is, and so you try to do it for 4 minutes. So the goal is 4 minutes, but if you do it twice through, then you build that gamification. By the time you're doing this, you're not in that anxiety state. You've now taken yourself out of the sympathetic dominance and you've moved into the, this relaxed state, because it's making you, you can't be in both places and do this kind of pattern. So, and on the drum, of course, it sounds amazing, but it's a good example. 4-minute habit. Everybody should know the 4-minute habit. As far as I'm going to take the 4-minute habit and use it, because it can't not work. Nobody's ever come back and thought, hey, no, of course it works.
I've done that in my life. This thing of not quite so organized, but where you accent this side, then you accent that side, and that as a pleasurable, as a relaxing thing. And I was just listening to the word saying control the brain. I'm thinking, I'd almost like to reword it to you coordinate the brain. To regulate it. So it's this coordination. I just not wanting to get with the confused with the fact that you've got willpower dominating the automatic. Yeah. What you're actually getting into is not the cognitive dominance. You're actually getting into the subcortical reorganization, and then you're able to regulate. Yeah. It's these broken, disorganized, confused, dissociated sort of things that you're talking about, that trauma stimulates. I protect myself and feel safer when I am dissociated or disorganized or disintegrated. And then you do this sort of rhythmic type of stuff, and the body goes, no, actually, I prefer that. oh,
Yeah.
just a minute, I've made a mistake. Of course,
Right. It's like, oh, it feels good. Okay.
But then the real world comes on, all the unsafe world comes along. So that's why you need the program. I can see you need time to not only say to the body, I prefer this, but just a minute. Now, how can I reframe the way I'm working with the danger space, that horrible thing out there.
And I say to become the boss of the brain, because usually in that state for trauma survivors, it's taken over your whole life. The brain is running the show. And most people don't even know that there's an option. So I have a heavy influence on becoming the boss of the brain to get that control. And then I can totally see how what you were saying about the coordinated kind of effort, the whole person effort all together, yes, is at peace, right? So, but no matter what, as soon as the brain gets carried away, you got to get it back in line and give it something. Like I was saying, you give it an alternative. And the brain responds to questions and commands. And the problem is with all the mind techniques and the whole mind, change your mind, change your thoughts, is that voice in your head, that inner critic, people think that that's what can run the show. And unfortunately, that can be the monkey mind. And now you got another problem. This is why I'm like, okay, if you don't want to call it the soul, call it something else, but it's the conscious that controls the mind, that influences the brain, that it's this pattern, right? So that's how we have to look at it like this, because I can't say enough of how it's unfair to people that are suffering, to be giving them things that can't work. It can't work if they're not in their bodies. It can't work, and so it makes them feel like they've failed. How many people they've been to therapy for 10 years and they don't even know that their brain processes it. They don't even know. Like, they really don't know. Most people don't really. They know they have a brain, of course, but they don't relate it to being in toxic relationships. They don't relate it to somatic problems. They don't relate it at all. They think it's the mind, because it's like the mind. And I'm like, oh, wait, the brain.
Well, it is our great discomfort that we have, is that we use all these terms and there isn't a clear understanding of what they are. But there's lots of stories. We've got some. I keep reading this fabulous thing we did with Joseph Ledoux, and we just released a podcast on that.
Yeah, I heard it.
And he's just really cool. So Matt, I jumped in there. Sorry.
Yes. And like I was going to say, I'm not disrespecting I'm not disrespecting the other practices. I really would love, I just want to open this conversation up where we talk about the truth about trauma and trauma treatment and what is needed, and not pretend that the gold standard is still acceptable today, because it's not. It was gold standard because we didn't have the neuroscientific technologies back then. So there's no way of catching up. You can't be cutting edge and have a decade of evidence. So we can't just keep bringing all this forward without, really talking about how we got here and where we need to go here in the 21st century.
Tell you what, I'd love to hear, as we've gone through so much of that. Have you got without revealing a client, I suppose, but is there a bit of a case study, a bit of a success story, or an example of this happening with someone? I mean, we've given some broad frames. Is there just sort of a particular case that you could just sort of take us through, and that might, take us to the end of our time anyway? Okay,
sure. I was working with this such a beautiful human being. He's been in the military for almost at retirement, but not in retirement. So very high level in the military, has severe PTSD, and came to me, said he hadn't smiled or laughed or done anything of enjoyment for like 8 years. And he was introduced to me, and I was like, I can just tell. I mean, it's like you get on the video with me and I'm like, oh, I got you. I've got you. You stick with the 12 weeks and we've got this. So now, of course, the men and women in military or high professions like that, high stress professions, are usually very disciplined. So there was a bit of a bonus there, because if I said, do this, try that, he would do it. So it was the first time, because I can tell if you're not doing what I can tell that the brain isn't rewiring because you haven't done it. So most people, you got to come from that stage. And he was just, you've got to be at the level where you're disgusted with your life. You got nothing else, nothing, So we worked through this. We went through the boundaries that, which is a big part, especially with military. You can't have boundaries. They're taught not to, right? You have to. So a lot of suppression. And by the time the 12 weeks, I'm telling you, you can't imagine this man. He is so happy. And we are, because I'm like, I'm very competitive too. So I'm like, he kind of like challenged me. And I'm like, bro, I'm going to slay you if you challenge. So we would play like this. And he was so, he was a changed man. He will never be the same, because he knows what it takes. He knows the brain, the body, the mind. He understands it. So going forward, he will always have this. And this is why it was so important to have a sustainable approach, where he doesn't need me. He's going to, unless something comes up, and then we can re-engage, but he has the skill set. And to see how happy, like laughing, crazy fun time. And he had said to me, I said, oh my God, if people saw what this was like, they'd think we're crazy. And he said, if people could see what you would do, they would be blown away. And that was when I was like, wait a minute, maybe people should see more, because it's a lot of time, you hide, of course, the case. So I don't do it in front of people. It's very personal, right? So that's a great example. And, it's so beautiful. It's so beautiful to see.
I mean, and we talk about, in our book, we talk about, client capacities and that they have these capacities. Mm-hmm. But what they are is like everything else. Our capacities for mental health, our mental health immune system, it needs to develop. It needs to engage. It needs to have the exercises that allow it to function successfully. And that is what we do. That is what we do in therapy. And your particular therapy has this particularly broad and wide-ranging effect that, as you say, it will work. It will happen if we go through the process, because the process opens the doors. And we've got the doors, but a hell of a lot of them are closed. And you add some trauma into your life, and they're the locks on the doors. So some people have the doors they haven't opened, but certainly trauma adds locks, and so you've got extra work to do. So there's more difficulty.
And I really think we have to get away from this image of trauma survivors being like the homeless or very meek and mild. No, they're men in power, men and women in power. They're CEOs. They're high functioning, living out there in the world, suffering. And so I don't take that position of that therapy has to be, all dark and gloomy, and, we've got to go into like the dark, deep stuff. You do have to address things. But like I said, if we gave them something that they wanted to go, like I'm hoping that the trauma treatment becomes, going forward, that you want to get trauma treatment. It should be that freaking amazing that is calling everybody going, hey, have you gone? Because you should. It's great. Like that's what I want it to turn into, instead of this like, let's talk mental health even. It's like, no, let's talk about the brain. Let's talk about how you can retrain the traumatized brain. The power is, it's in your hands. It's what greater empowerment is that when you find out that, oh my, it's you have the ability, and it's not like some complicated, you don't got to learn it all. You got to learn what works for you and then repeat.
And it certainly sounds like what you've been doing is just super fun. as well.
Yeah, it really is.
As we wind up, let us know where people can go to find out more about you and these techniques.
Well, the easiest way to find me is drpamelaseraphine.com. And you can also find more about the program at the 21stcenturydrummer.com. So those are the two places. And I would love for your listeners, if people want to reach out to me, I'm always into collaborating and talking more. So that would be great.
Awesome. Dr. Pamela Seraphine, thank you so much for being here on the Science of Psychotherapy podcast. And we hope that we'll have more conversations in the future.
Thank you so much, you guys. I'm so honored, and I'm just so thrilled to be able to share my passion and my expertise and to be part of this community with you guys. You guys are awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Pamela. We'll see you before too long, and maybe we'll bring some drums into the next one.
Yes, let's do it.
Us here too. So fantastic. And you can take us through some stuff. So wonderful.
That'd be great. I'd love to.
But for now, we'll say farewell until next time. And thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and your enthusiasm. It makes Matt and I look quiet boys. So it's very good.
I know. Yeah, you guys want to liven up. We got some drumming to do. Come on.
Yeah. Okay. Bye for now.
Okay. Take care.